Well, hello. I want to start this episode with a question. How good are your sexual boundaries? Or maybe I should ask, do you even know what sexual boundaries are? That is exactly what I'm going to be hitting in this episode. So, I'm Terry Cole, and my book, Boundary Boss, The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free, is coming out April 21st. Woohoo! And if you don't know me, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the founder of Real Love Revolution and Boundary Bootcamp. So, before we get started, I want to make sure that you are subscribed to my channel. So just hit that little bell so that you can get notifications when anything new comes up. Don't you want to know what I'm posting? I know you do. So, recently I did an episode called Boundary Basics where I talked about the 7 types of personal boundaries. So, to review, personal boundaries are also unique to you. So, it isn't like everyone has the same personal boundaries, because we don't. They're informed by all different experiences that we've had in life, childhood experiences, cultural norms, gender roles, and a whole bunch of other factors in our growing up life. There is no one and done action like, when you think about boundaries, if you look at a house, right, there's like a fence around a house, and if it says, keep out, violators will be prosecuted, we get that. There's no one and done like putting up a sign type of a thing when it comes to understanding, enforcing, communicating our personal boundaries. And this really, really applies to our sexual boundaries because there is a whole boatload of other experiences that complicate that depending on the culture that you come from, the family system that you come from. So I think it's super important that we normalize talking about sexual boundaries. So, what does it really mean? What is a sexual boundary? When you have good sexual boundaries, you know that you are the person who decides what level of touch is acceptable to you, right? That's not for anyone else to decide, as well as where, when, and with whom being sexual can happen. So what is a sexual violation? Well, someone coercing or forcing you to be sexual. That is the most obvious. But someone making lewd comments, behaving in a way that is intended to basically arouse or gratify their own sexual impulse without your expressed consent. Those are all examples of boundary violations. And in the book, I do an entire thing on sexual boundaries as a subset of physical boundaries. So, let's actually move into why is this so confusing and or challenging? And I can tell you from being a psychotherapist for almost 2.5 decades that this is something, especially for women, that can be incredibly loaded. Communicating about anything that is sexual, but especially boundaries. Having the courage to say no to something, to speak up about something, to draw your boundary and be clear and concise. When we think about what boundaries are, right, Brene Brown has a very simple explanation. She says it's letting the people in your life know what is okay with you and what is not okay with you. That makes sense, right? That's very simple to understand. Why then, even if you can do that in your relationship, you can still struggle with doing this in a sexual situation. So we have a lot of things that impact why that is. But one that is major is the culture around sex, sensuality, and sexuality in the family culture that you grew up in. So I grew up in a family culture that was, I don't know if you guys know this description. I mean, uptight, I guess, would probably be the way to describe it. Perhaps proper, I want to say waspy, but I don't think that people all over the world understand what white Anglo-Saxon Protestant means. It's like these are not things that you would talk about in a family setting. And it isn't like even my mother, I have three older sisters, and it isn't even like my mother sat down and was like, okay, this is what it's all about. This is what sex is about. This is what you should and shouldn't do. But we all get covert and overt messaging around sex, sexuality, and sensuality. So my story is that my mom and dad were high school sweethearts. My mother worked for 2 years after high school because both of my folks grew up very poor. So she couldn't have, nobody had money to go to college, and nobody had gone to college really before her. And so she worked at a factory to save money to go to college. And my father was quite an athlete, and so he went to college directly on a full ride. And my mother finally saved up enough money to start college and got pregnant with my oldest sister during Thanksgiving break. So she had to drop out of college, or she chose to. I mean, this was 1958, and my parents got married in the back office of a Methodist church in, I believe it was Glens Falls, New York, or Schenectady, or somewhere. So not exactly, that doesn't exactly make you think of like, wow, I can't wait to have that kind of a wedding. But it also created an association for me unconsciously that sex could mean the end of your dreams. And my mother very much did not want me in particular to be promiscuous. I was the youngest. And the vibe, whether she said it or not, but I really got the message from her that she thought it would be better if I didn't have sex. So I didn't, like, for a long time. I mean, I think my high school boyfriend, I didn't have sex until I was almost 18, and I was going out with him for like 2.5 years at that point. I mean, it's high school and all, but I'm just saying a lot of my friends were already sexual by that point, but they had a different, I call it your sex and sensuality blueprint. Theirs was different than mine. But I was heavily impacted by that. And there are other things that can heavily impact the way that you relate to sex. So yes, there's modeled behavior, and there is the overt and covert messaging, like I just shared with you, that I had in my life experience. But all of you had that in some way. My parents were pretty proper in that neither of them walked around, my father had 4 daughters and would not walk around without clothes on in the house, or he would, always wear a robe, or, it was quite, I don't know what the right word is, but you understand, it was like not like a hippie situation, although I was a very free loving kid, and I walked around in jean shorts and no shirt on, like for until probably 3rd grade, I'd say maybe. My mother used to always say, have you no modesty? And I used to say, I guess not. I don't know. I don't care. I had my puka beads on. I was into it. I felt like I was a little hippie kid. But that didn't really translate to me being feeling free or knowledgeable sexually. Because here's the thing. If the message that you got, if the way that you grew up was similar to the way that I grew up, you have sexual boundaries, but they're still disordered because my sexual boundaries were actually too rigid. There was a lot of fear associated with that in my young life. I mean, of course, through many years of my own therapy, obviously I figured it out eventually, but that was something that I was never comfortable. I never really got it. And even when I started being sexual, I was a little bit like, wait, is this the whole thing? Is this what everyone's talking about? Because it's fine, but it's not great. I never had dreams of tantric anything, right? Because it was something that was in a box, but there was a certain amount of negativity and fear that was connected to it. Look at the culture that you grew up in. So that's your family culture. That's one thing. Then look at the more broad culture where, for me, I was getting all these mixed messages because movies and advertising is all about sex and is all about being sexy, and the value of a woman is being alluring and being, you didn't see, especially because I grew up, in the 70s and 80s, well, 80s and 90s, because I was still young in the 70s, but where you didn't see, it wasn't like, oh, look at these scientists and these CEO women. It was still very like a caricature of women in movies, and sexism was so the patriarchy and sexism was still such the rule of the day. So much has changed since then, but when you look at your formative years, like when did you get influenced? Well, I mean, so much of this happens under the age of 12, let's say, and really under the age of 20, right? Because in your teen years, many people start being sexual and dating and trying to understand like the power of sexuality, your own sexuality. I felt like and learned, and I think a lot of my friends at the time too, looked at sex as something that someone else wanted from you. And it was yours to give or not give, let's say, but it was somehow being sexual. It wasn't gaining anything in my mind. It was giving up something. It was allowing someone to have control over me in some way. Now, that is a very different feeling than what anyone would want when it comes to sex and sensuality, being self-sexual. There is so much beauty in becoming empowered in this way, but healthy sexual boundaries are a really important part of that. So I'm giving you a download that you can have at the end of this, which will be you figuring out your sex and sensuality blueprint. Because listen, you might be listening to this and being like, that is so weird, right? My own experience, because your experience might have been vastly different. And no matter what, your experience was certainly different. So I really want you to take the time, download this. Of course, it'll all be in the show notes and everything you need, but download it at the end and really take the time and do it, because this could be a power pivot for you in your life. Because a lot of times I found from the women in my courses and in my psychotherapy practice that there's a certain amount of just acceptance, like, well, this is the way it is, just something you got to do, check it off the list, which is such a drag. And when you can learn sexual boundaries, which, let me be clear, when I'm talking about sexual boundaries, I'm not talking about simply saying no or not being sexual when you don't want to be. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that right now. I'm also talking about saying yes to you, saying yes to your desires, saying yes to your sensuality, saying yes to nurturing that part of you, because that is a very important part. There is so much creativity in that part of you, and there is so much pleasure to be had if you can figure out healthy sexual boundaries. And of course, I'm a psychotherapist and I wrote a whole friggin' book on boundaries, so I know that you can, because I can most definitely teach you at this point. So let's talk about how do we, what are the types of sexual boundaries that you might want to draw? You might need to talk about safe sex. So what would that sound like? It might sound like, I have a condom. If you don't, I don't have unprotected sex, right? That would be something that would be very clear to communicate. But if you don't have those words, it can feel very awkward. It can be very difficult to say those things. I think discussing what you like, discussing what feels good, is something that many of us, especially if you grew up in a repressed system, as I did, it just is so hard. I found it took years of therapy and really working on this for me to be able to even know what I wanted sexually, even know what felt good. I was too busy feeling embarrassed by the entire thing. I was just like, God, just get it over with, because this is just, I was like blushing the entire time when I was much younger. So you may have that similar experience where no one really taught you, but allowing the other person to know where you stand, what is working with you, and even when you're dating, right? Being able to talk about how quickly or not you would like to be sexual, what your preferences are, being able to say no to things that are painful or that you don't like. So understand this. expecting to just know the language of healthy boundaries, of healthy sexual boundaries, of any healthy boundaries, without any instruction, without an amazing coach, is like expecting to wake up fluent in like Mandarin or Russian simply because you'd really like to be. That is not the way it works. That is not the way learning works. But you have to harness the mind-blowing power of your intention. Focus your energy on learning this for you, because you have the right to not be sexual when you don't want to be, and you have the right to enjoy being self-sexual, right? Masturbation. You have the right to have an amazing sexual connection with a partner in your life, or with many partners, if that is your sexual boundary and that works for you, right? Literally, this whole thing is a no judgment zone. I'm shining a light on it because I get a lot of questions about this from people out there in the world who listen to the podcast, who watch it on YouTube, or from women who are in my courses. So I think that there's really something about sex, sexuality, sensuality that we've all learned. I would say some disordered boundaries around that. We have some corrupted information in the basement of our mind, as I like to say, right? Your unconscious mind, that really needs for us to flip on a floodlight. And don't worry, I'll be with you. I'll hold your hand. I'll go down there with you in that basement. I got my little miner's light on my head, and we can open up those boxes and get that information. Because listen, how can you possibly communicate in a relationship what you want, sexually or otherwise, if you've never taken the time to actually think about what you want and your own body? If you're not being self-sexual, how can you know? So, I've created a sex, pleasure, and romance blueprint for you. I put my heart and my soul into it. I really want you to take time, create the expansion to do this exercise, to start to get more intimate with yourself, right? Because this is a really important part of who you are. And if we cut it off simply because when we were younger, nobody taught us, you're really losing something. You're really missing out. So to get it, all you have to do to get the description, the show note, you'll have it in the show notes, but you can go to terricole.com/sex blueprint. terricole.com/sex blueprint. And then please post about it. Leave me comments. Ask me questions. Let's normalize this conversation about sex, sensuality, and sexual boundaries. I gotta say, you guys, isn't it about friggin' time? Because I feel like it is. So I hope that this episode added value to your life, made you think, is going to inspire you to power pivot in your own sexuality. And if it did, please share it on your social media platforms. Drop something into an IG story, tag me, and I will repost. Let's get this conversation going. I hope you have an amazing week. And as always, take care of you.